Welcome to this hands-on guide for the S3 virtual schemas. We're going to create a virtual schema for JSON data on an S3 bucket during this guide. So I did already prepared an AWS S3 bucket which contains some example data. So you can see here in the Amazon Management Console that we have an S3 bucket named S3 Virtual Schema Test Bucket, which contains 3 JSON files, which we are going to integrate into the Exasol database now using the S3 Virtual Schema. So I did already set up this bucket here. If you want to follow me, you also need to create a bucket in your S3 account and upload the example data you can find in the written version of this tutorial. You can also use the Terraform script just like me to create this without clicking through the AWS Web Console. Okay, now the very first thing we have to do is install the virtual schema adapter into the Exasol database. The first step for this is upload the adapter to the Bucketfs of the Exasol database. I did already download the release of the S3 Virtual Schema adapter from its GitHub page. Now I'm going to upload it to Bucketfs. Therefore I'm using curl in a console and I'm going to upload it here to Bucketfs. And we can see it was successful. So now I open a SQL client and start running some SQL commands. So first I create a schema for the adapter, then I create the adapter script itself and an UDF. If you want to learn about details why we need this UDF, check out the written version. Okay, so now basically the adapter is installed and we are going to use it. Therefore, we need to tell the Exasol database how to access the S3 connection. So we need some credentials and an URL. I did already create here the connection definition with some access key. So these are not my credentials I used to log in into the console here, but I created here under my security credentials an access key pair. You can also do this by clicking here create access key. Okay, I put these two keys in here. Notice that you cannot use two-factor authentication while you're using the virtual schema because you cannot enter your token each time a query is sent. Next, I filled in the URL here. So here you can see the name of my bucket and here my region. And I have here no prefix, so we will leave it to the mapping definition, which we'll see later. Okay, so now I create this connection definition, which was also successful. And after having done this, we can create the virtual schema which uses this connection. But for the virtual schema, we need a mapping definition which tells the adapter how to map the JSON files to the Exasol table structure. For that, I did already prepare a mapping. So you see in the mapping that we are mapping data from the source, which is the name or a pattern describing the data to load, book -star.json, which will match the files we created in our bucket. So here are the files and you can see they have this format. The star will match the number of the different files here. Okay, back to the mapping. So this source here will match all files in our bucket and we map them to destination tables books and map the property title of the file to a varchar column in the Exasol database. You can also just copy this file for the beginning and for further details consider the EDML documentation. Okay, now we will upload this file again using curl to bucketfs. This looks good, so it's uploaded. And go again to the SQL client and finally create the virtual schema. So as you can see here, it was successful. So now let's take a look on the table. So you can see that the query is running now and it takes some time, but this time it always takes, and it's always almost as fast as this because it uses a whole cluster and it has some startup time for some processes internally. So you can see we did the mapping of the title of the JSON data here and created an Exasol column out of it. So everything looks fine. And finally, I want to show you one last thing. And I'm going to do a selection on or add a where clause for one column, which is the source reference column you can see here. So I will filter the data and only get one of the books. So as you would have probably expected, we now get only one book. But the trick about this is that the virtual schema adapter does filters with equality or like predicates on the source reference column fast, because it only fetches the corresponding data from the S3. For other columns, this does of course not work because the S3 is not a database and cannot filter the data itself. But for this column it can. So if you have the possibility to filter in your queries on the data and have a very large collection of documents, you can fasten the query by this very much. Okay, that's it. For more details, check out the user guide or the EDML documentation.